Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is the woman who knows how to set personal boundaries, Alex Standy. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. And I'm always particularly happy when I get to see my friend Alex smiling as she usually does. Bobbi, our guest Bobbi Kahler is here, and Bobbi, I just got to tell you, Alex always smiles. No matter what's going on. It's actually a little bit disconcerting at times because she can be smiling when she's in absolute pain, and I have to discern what's going on her face. Right now, I can tell she's feeling really good. But there are times where, she has this amazing ability to smile through anything. So, and like the intro said, she is a queen of personal boundaries. So she has found a way to marry the two, which is really awesome. A strong trait. Yeah. So that's just my way of saying, Alex, I love you and I'm proud of you.
Aw, thanks.
Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Yeah?
Hanging in there.
There's the qualifier, right?
Yeah. Living the dream, taking it one day at a time. What are the other ones?
That's good. Okay. Yeah, we'll just keep pulling those cliches out.
Exactly.
And our guest today is Bobbi Kahler. Now, Bobbi is, well, I don't really know how to label her, and I don't really like labeling anyway, but she's basically somebody who wants to help people to get past I like the term that she uses to describe it. She wants you to get past your how'd you say it? Your inner, I can't remember.
Inner saboteurs.
Inner saboteurs. That's the one. Yeah.
Ooh.
That phrase, Alex, doesn't that really describe it? Inner saboteurs?
Yeah.
It summarizes it in 2 words. So, Bobbi, thanks for joining us on the program today. Where are you contacting us from?
Well, I am here in Colorado today, right outside Rocky Mountain National Park at about 9,000 feet where it's snowing and nice and cold.
Oh, yeah. The beauty of December. I love it. That's great.
Right.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I basically, I guess the best way to describe me would be to say that I'm a self-leadership coach. Mm-hmm. I'm also a podcaster, a speaker, a writer, and I delve into self-leadership, which is all about being very intentional about how we're constructing our lives, directing our thoughts, our actions, our mindset, our behaviors towards an intentional goal. And I think that I got set on this path very, very early in life. When I was about 6 years old, the school that I attended told my parents that I had catastrophic speech problems and that I would never. Catastrophic. Yeah. Not just speech problems. If I'm going to do something, guys, I'm going all in. I mean, so it was, but in this speech, that pathologist, he told my mom, he's like, she's never going to talk correctly. Ever. Geez. And, my mom, when she told me what he had to say, she gave me a big hug and she said, but we're not going to listen to him because you never let someone else tell you what you can or cannot do.
What a great mom.
Really, right? And so what I learned from her over the years, like I would struggle to say words and I'd say, oh, I can't say that. And she's like, no, you can't say it yet. And I think because of that experience, that put me on the path of wanting to help other people, so I think that's really, kind of where it all began for me was in childhood and just seeing that effect that it had on me because she could have just said, yeah, you know what? You're just going to have this issue and too bad. But thankfully she didn't.
Well, apparently it worked what she was doing because you're speaking better than I am today. I was stumbling all over the place a few minutes ago. You're just coming out nice and clear. So, whoa.
Well, thank you. I'm always hyper aware though when I say a word wrong. I think when you've had speech problems at a point, you're very aware of it. But thank you.
I'm not hyper aware. I'm aware of it. I just get pissed at myself and move on.
Love that.
It's fun how we have to deal with this stuff, but that's part of what it is with life. I mean, you're no exception. Every single guest who's come onto the program has something in their past that, in some cases it's a crash and burn. In other cases, in your case, was an impediment, various things that get in the way. And amazingly, they always turn into a new superpower that kind of emerges.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
If you're going to summarize what your superpower is that has emerged from that experience, how would you describe it? What would you say it is?
I help people really tap into them at their very, very best.
Okay.
That's what that is. And I think it's really about seeing your own potential. And it's funny that you said the thing about, sometimes that brings that out. When I was in 8th grade, because I had these speech problems, I hated speaking in public. I mean, obviously I still had speech problems, and who wants to?
Gee, I wonder why. I mean,
yeah, when you make, it's so much fun.
Oh, yeah. You live for that one.
Yeah. Well, why not? So I challenged myself, and I thought, okay, I'm going to take a speech class when I go to high school. And so my speech teacher was Mr. Jordan, and I gave my very first speech, and it was a train wreck. And I'm not being hard on myself. That's an honest assessment of my performance. And when class ended, Mr. Jordan said, "Hey, Bobbi, can you stick around for a few minutes?" And I thought, oh my God, I've done so bad. He's going to tell me not to come back. And as luck would have it, he was also the coach for the speech and debate team.
Oh.
And so he said to me, "Have you ever thought of joining the speech and debate team?" And I just remember looking at him, and I thought, "Were you in the room?" And he kind of laughed, and he's like, "Yeah," he goes, "It wasn't very good, but," he said, "you've got potential."
Wow.
And he said, "With your potential and my work ethic," and he said, "your work ethic and my coaching," he said, "I think you can really do well with this."
Wow.
And that was,
Aww.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, how lucky was I?
Potential. I mean, that's like, I sense that goes way beyond a teacher having concern for a difficulty that a student is having. He was seeing something.
Yeah. Yeah. He was special though. And I was so lucky to have someone like that in my life, and I have a number of those people. So yeah, even though it was on one hand, you could say, well, it was bad to have a speech problem. On the other hand, look how it helped people show up for me.
Yeah.
Right.
Alex, as you're listening to this, your high school years weren't all that wonderful either. Well, later on, I guess perhaps more than high school. But when you hear her story, does it relate to yours? Do you feel like there's a connection going on there?
No, my high school experience was great. What are you talking about?
Well, I all right. It was after the high school. I'm sorry. You're right. It was like early.
Yeah,
20s.
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Sorry, I timed it wrong. My mistake.
I was like,
yeah,
wait.
once again, I'm putting my tongue in front of my eye teeth and screwing up again. This is crazy. Can't see what I'm saying.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, It was really bad, but I had to do something to climb out of that one.
Oh.
But seriously, going back to your early 20s, do you see a similar story going on with what Bobbi was telling?
In a way, yeah. Because when I was, what was it, 22? Nope, 24. I was diagnosed with autism.
At 24.
Exactly. Wow. Right. So that's what we're talking about.
Wow, Alex.
So it's like it shakes you, because it's like, okay, so now my whole life makes sense, but also too, the ableism that was going on growing up, it's crazy.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. At 24, is that unusual to be diagnosed at that age?
Yeah, but then I found a bunch of other people that were late diagnosis, and they're in their like 50s and they're just getting their diagnosis.
Wow. Man, anything that rocks your foundation a little bit, I think, is always tough to process a little bit.
Yeah.
Wow. Man.
So when you got that diagnosis, give us an idea again. I know we've talked about this before on the show, but give us an idea again of how did you end up managing it? What kind of help did you get to manage it?
Luckily I was in therapy at the time, so the transition was a little easier, and I got diagnosed by a psychiatrist who I'm still with, and he just stuck with me and walked me through the whole process and everything. So it was a smoother transition than it could have been. It could have been just been like, hey, it is what it is, bye. But they held my hand. So
yeah,
man, having the right person there with you makes a huge difference.
Yes, it definitely does. That's
what I was thinking of. That's what I was trying to tie together very poorly, but that was it. Yeah.
That's all right. You got an extra story out of
it. This is true. I did. Yeah.
And the point came out, so it's all good.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
No, I just try to keep it light as well. But yeah, I mean, once again, we're demonstrating through the stories that we're telling that we encounter these experiences in our lives. We perhaps run into a deficit of our own, where we experience something that somebody else does to us, whatever. And then it comes down to one thing, really. Great to have that support, great to have somebody stepping in, but how are we going to respond to it?
Right.
It's such a great question, right? Because we know that crossroads are going to happen. Things are going to happen. We might be taken off of our path. Someone might mistreat us. I was just thinking about this the other day because I was going through this thing where someone intentionally, unintentionally, don't know, but they treated me kind of poorly, let's say. And I was thinking about it. It's like, well, how am I going to respond? Because I think there's that it kicks in initially where you're like, well, I've got to retaliate, or I have to reciprocate. And it's like, no, that never works. Number one. And who do I want to be in this moment? How do I want to respond?
Great
What's
question.
true for me? And it was interesting too, Walt, because, I had this thought about we should never let someone else's bad behavior, affect who we are, who we are in our heart. Because once we do that, then we lose.
Yeah, we basically take it into ourselves.
That's right.
Right.
And that eats at us.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's like, think about it. If you respond poorly and, with bad behavior, then you have to continue to be angry at that person to continue to justify your own bad behavior. So you keep it alive.
Which really sucks, by the way.
It's not
just
good.
saying. I mean,
It's stupid.
Yeah.
It's like, why? It's such a waste of time.
It's a huge waste of time. It's so funny. I don't know if you guys watched The Voice at all, but the finale was this week, and the one guy sang a song. It was a Tim McGraw song, "Always Be Humble and Kind." And there was a line in there, and I'd missed it, and I've heard that song before, but the line is something like, "You cannot hold bitterness in your heart and fly." And I think nice. I might have butchered that line, but that's the essence.
Hey, you got the essence of it.
Yeah. And I thought, wow, that is so true.
Yeah.
That's why they say we forgive for ourselves, not necessarily for the person who has transgressed.
So give us an idea of, you told us where the background was, and you told us what how you described what you transitioned into, with the kind of person, the kind of career you transitioned into, but give us an idea of how you take your experience there when you were in high school and apply it when you're working with people who are your own clients today. Okay.
So at this point, I've done a lot of coaching. I've coached more than 3,000 people in my career. And some of that has been, some of it's leadership, some of it's, helping sales professionals, some of it's one-on-one with people who are just trying to create a thriving life. So a lot of different, applications. But the thing that is always true to me, for me, and also I've facilitated, thousands of workshops. I've given hundreds of speeches, but the thing that is always true is this belief that I have that the person who's in front of me, that their potential is greater than their present performance. Present performance, that's simply where we are. It doesn't determine where we can go. And so I always hold this huge belief in possibilities for the person that I'm coaching. And I think one way to say that in coaching terms, it's, holding unconditional positive regard. I don't know if you, Coachville, the founder was Thomas Leonard, who passed away, unfortunately, in the early 2000s. He was amazing. And I think one of the things that Thomas said, and I loved this, is that when you're coaching someone, come from the mindset of they're doing the very best they can, even when they're not.
That phrase, especially the first part, that's one of my go-tos.
Yeah.
It's one of my best ways of letting go of frustration with somebody.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
Because when you can let go of that frustration, then you look at it differently. You get a different perspective. You think about the person differently. You think about the situation differently. You think about any, attached events differently, just because you let go of that one thing.
Yeah, that's right. Pivoted. What was that, Alex?
You pivoted.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you had a new perspective.
And I think when we do that, what we're doing is we're showing up with empathy. And from neuroscience when I had to study that back in grad school. We can't be both frustrated and empathetic at the same time. So by shifting to empathy, and also think about it, if I'm frustrated with someone, like if I'm frustrated with Alex and I'm trying to coach her, you're going to know that. You're going to feel it. And then what happens? You're probably going to be defensive, or you're going to shut down.
Right.
So it doesn't lead you anywhere. So having that positive intention, that positive regard, and I think that applies with life in general. It just doesn't have to be a coaching session.
Sure. Because anytime that we do something like that, what we're really doing is putting out what in LOA terms we like to call a high vibe. And the moment you do that, anybody who is receiving that vibe is going to be affected positively by it. And it doesn't matter what state they're in.
Right.
They could be at the highest level of joy, the lowest level of depression, somewhere in the middle with bored. It doesn't matter. They're going to be affected positively by it.
Yep.
Which is cool. Yeah. I like that part.
Yeah. It's a great way to have an impact.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that's really interesting about it is this is something we haven't talked about in a while here on the show, but we used to talk about it quite a bit. We can often have an impact that we never see.
Yeah.
Right.
Right? Yep. Maybe we aimed it at somebody and that person didn't pick it up. But somewhere along the line, somebody else picked it up and we weren't even aware of it.
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
It's very powerful.
It
and
is.
Occasionally then like years later, someone will come back and they'll say, remember when you did X, that really made it. And I'm like, I don't remember doing that. But I'm glad I did. Or I hope you didn't confuse me with somebody else.
Well, that's the other thing. It's amazing how often, now in this case, you're talking about something where people are holding on to a positive, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
The negatives, it's amazing how often people will hang on to a negative event and the person who was involved in the negative event doesn't even remember the event.
Not at all.
My gosh. Period.
Right?
Right?
Take me back to my 20th reunion 3 weeks ago. Stop. That's what it was all about.
Finding out basically all the different ways that the classmates didn't remember something that you rememred. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm like, why have you been holding on to that for 20 years? I'm so sorry for you.
Right?
It's embarrassing a little bit.
God. You know what's even funny too? I don't know if it's funny or not, but sometimes it's like, it didn't even really happen. Like the same event happened, but the way they perceived it
was
so different. It's like, wow, I never even thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Well, we humans have a tendency to ratchet things up, particularly if they're negative.
That's right.
Because partly it's a way to justify having the negative feeling in the first place.
Yep.
That way nobody can question it. Well, obviously it was really bad. Here's how bad it was.
Yep. And the other thing is we all have our paradigms. We all have our thought patterns, the inner saboteurs, right? And those greatly affect how we see things, the lens that we put on it. So we're literally looking for those things. And then what do you know? That's what shows up.
Nice segue. So let's go into inner saboteurs.
I didn't mean for that to be. It was just a connection.
That's the way it works around here. That's why we leave the conversation free form. We never know where it's going to go, but interestingly enough, it always goes where it needs to. So here we are. Tell us about inner saboteurs.
Okay. So inner saboteurs, think about it this way. Those are our automatic ways of thinking, feeling, and responding. And they're ingrained. They start in childhood and they form very well-worn neural pathways. That's why someone will say, oh, why did I act that way? Because it's automatic. We're not even thinking about it anymore. And so what the researchers have found is that there are 10 different inner saboteurs. There's one that's universal, and that's the judge. And the judge can be of ourselves, which we all have that one, right? Some have really, really terrible inner judges towards themselves. It can be judges towards others and judging of circumstances. And that's why, it's hard for us to be happy. It's always that I'll be happy when type of thing. So that's the universal one. And then there are 9 accomplice saboteurs. What's that?
9 of them.
9. Yeah. And it's all based on the research of Shirzad Chamine. He is a lecturer at Stanford, And if the listeners, there's a book called Positive Intelligence. It's a fabulous book. It all lays it out. But so I can tell you the 9. And as I do this, just kind of like, they're pretty self-explanatory, but think about how they would apply to you or people that you know, right? So the first one is the avoider. Okay. The second one is the controller. Mm-hmm. Has to have control of everything. Yep. Then you have the hyperachiever, the hyper-rational. No, everything's logic, no emotion. The hyper-vigilant, which happens to be one of my big ones. Mm-hmm. Then we've got the pleaser, the restless, the stickler, and the victim. And so we have typically a combination of, we all have the judge, and then a combination of typically 2 to 4 of these. Some people do have more.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. The reason I say that is he put, I'm not sure which way it is, but he put victim in a separate category from many of those, and then you describe how they go together. And in my mind, a lot of them, the victim just goes with it automatically. The idea that they're separate is really an interesting idea to me. One that I hadn't really considered.
Yeah, because not everybody has the victim separate. Actually, one of the things he said, this was in one of his the courses I took, he said, while the judge is universal, some people don't have the victim, but typically some form of the victim does show up.
Yeah.
It might not be as strong as it is in others.
Sure.
Just like the restless is another one that shows up in a lot of people, even if it's at a very low level. And that's why people are like, I got to jump from this thing to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And it's hard for us to really be present in the moment. It's not universal, but it's one of the more common where it shows up in a lot of people.
One of the ones you mentioned was the pleaser, which I interpret as the people pleaser. And that's one I'm trying to imagine. What is an example of a pleaser who doesn't also feel like a victim?
I guess it could go hand in hand. The pleaser, it manifests a little bit differently, because like a pleaser will get upset, like, wow, I did that. And, they're not reciprocating. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? A victim could be like, everybody's out to get me. And that's where it's a little bit different. You know what I mean?
So basically a low grade version of they're not responding.
Yeah, could be. And here's the thing too, like think about the pleaser is a great example. Like a pleaser, it's built upon a strength in a way, because a pleaser connects very easily with people. They care about people. They're, that they pour into people. It's when it goes too far and then they're not taking care of themselves.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But then that's how we see the world. That's how we start to see the world. Like, okay, so here's an example. Let's say that I had a friend and she was having trouble with her Facebook account, as was I at one point. I don't know why, but suddenly with her name was, I don't want to say her name, but she was having trouble and some people just got blocked. And she's like, I don't know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And some people were like, oh, hey, you might want to check out your Facebook account because it seems like you're blocked. And she was telling me this. We went to high school together. And then some people were like, why did you block me? Well, she's like, I didn't block anybody. It's just my Facebook account isn't working. But some people see how same event and we show up differently to it.
Yeah, very good point. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always what our reaction is. Not our reaction, what our response is. I mean, our reaction can be one thing, but our response can be selected. It can be different.
We can choose it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which that honestly, that took me a while to learn that one.
God, I remember when I first heard that was like a punch between the eyes. Like, what? I was in my mid-20s and I'm like, wow, my mind is blown.
For me, it was more like, you're full of crap. That's not possible. I do remember what it was like, though, the first time that I consciously came up with a different response. That was the punch between the eyes. Like, oh my God, I actually did it.
Wow. And you remember that? You remember that incident?
Do. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. How did it work out?
It was actually an incident just by myself. It was a very, very simple one. And it was something that I had talked about with my wife, and she gave me the idea to try this little test to demonstrate to myself. I was out on a walk, which I like to do frequently.
And let's see, what happened that particular day? I remember, I know what it was. I was feeling pretty miserable. I can't remember why I was feeling miserable, but I was feeling miserable about something. And as I'm walking along, I'm remembering what she told me, which was, see if you can find something to feel good about in the midst of your misery. And I said, oh, all right. Like what? And she says, well, look for some flowers and just go study the flowers. I said, well, all right, whatever. So went and studied the flowers. And in the process of studying the flowers, all of a sudden I forgot about this other thing that was bugging me and recognized that I had forgotten it. Because in the past, I didn't recognize it. It was like, oh, well, this is just a new event going on. That's all it was, you know. But this time, I had deliberately chosen to focus on something else when I was feeling miserable and shifted my emotion as a result.
Yeah.
And that's where the surprise came in, like, oh my God, how did I not know you could do this? How many other people don't know that you can do this? How many people have figured this out?
Right. Why is this being kept secret?
Yeah. This should be a headline in every newspaper. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I don't remember my first time, but I am just realizing now that I do it all the time. Like mid-conversation, like kind of be arguing with me about something, and I'm like, I'll start to argue back, and then I'll stop myself, and I go, you know what? It's not even worth it. So you know what? It doesn't even matter. Never mind. And I just walk away.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I like that. Yeah.
That's self-awareness, though.
When you were in your 20s and it hit you between the eyes, how did it hit you?
I think, this would have been my early 20s. I had a job at this one little company, and I drove the same route to work every day. And there's a church that had a reader board out front, and they'd always put these quotes up. And the one was, I think it was something like, when something happens, you have the power to choose your response. And I was driving the car and I'm like, what? I mean, it just kind of blew my mind, that, wow, this could actually happen. Cause, I had always been around a lot of people that I hadn't really seen that role modeled. Things would happen and it was okay to just, if you fly off the handle, you fly off the handle. So it was kind of amazing. And what's interesting about it is not very long after that, I had this epiphany around the way I was showing up wasn't getting me the results I wanted. Like I tended to have trouble with my coworkers. And I remember I switched jobs. And once again, I was in my head going, oh, I've always got these bad coworkers, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden it was like the universe tapped me on the shoulder and said, what's the common denominator?
Oh, that's not fair.
Is it me? Am I the drama?
I am the comma. Oh my God. And I was like, oh, but then I also tied it back to that whole thing about, I had learned it was okay to be reactionary. And guess what? A lot of people don't like that, and that's not, and I also knew that's not who I really am. Why am I showing up that way? So that's how they were kind of tied together a little bit for me. That was a painful moment though. Like, what's the common denominator, Bobby?
it's a wake up call is what it is. It's like,
right.
Oh, that's what's really going on around here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Grateful for that one. Hurt at the time.
Yeah. Well, it usually does, right? There's always a sting whenever you're dealing with something like that. You say, oh, that was me. Oh, okay.
Yeah. That wasn't good.
but there's also a payoff though when you get the message and when you understand, this is where Alex's great skill, because she really is excellent at boundaries. When you're able to establish a boundary with somebody that you realize you should have set before. And I'll give you an example of it. There's a former friend of mine. At the time he was a friend. He's no longer a friend. And the reason he's no longer a friend is because of this kind of incident that happened repeatedly. He is the kind of person like you were describing who would, it's okay to fly off the handle. It's okay to get mad at somebody and so forth. And he would take it to an extra level. He would take it to, I'm doing this for your own good. I'm doing this because this is my way of showing love for you.
Yeah.
Oh, the narcissism of it.
Oh, I know. It's crazy. And it took me a while. Actually, what it took with me was to have an experience with him where he wouldn't pull that on me often, but every once in a while he'd go off on me. And there was an effect that happened that, my wife knew about. I didn't know. My wife has a psychotherapeutic background, so that's why she knew about it. But I didn't know about it. Apparently, the more you get exposed to that kind of treatment, in whatever form it is, it has a cumulative effect. It builds and builds and builds and builds. And one day it went over the top. It went over the top lip, so to speak, and overflowed. And when it did, I experienced pain, psychic pain, like I had never experienced before. It was a total and complete surprise. I never experienced anything like that. But it also did two things. First, it gave me the impetus I needed to break the friendship. And the second thing that it did is it helped me to understand his personal history. Because in his personal history, he was divorced. His ex would never talk to him. He had 2 sons. His 2 sons would never talk to him. He came from a company where I used to work also. The people who owned the company wouldn't talk to him. Wow. And now I wasn't going to talk to him. He had a long history of alienating people. Mm-hmm. And every step along the way, whenever it was presented to him how he was alienating people, he said, that's not me, that's them. He refused to accept ownership for it, which is why everybody kept cutting him off.
So it's the whole world, not me.
It's everybody else.
Apparently.
Yeah. There is no common denominator here.
No. Man, when you start to see a pattern like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow. So can I ask a question of Alex?
Oh, of course.
Because I'm a big believer in boundaries, and I know that setting boundaries, for some people, it's really uncomfortable. What's your secret?
I've asked her that one before.
I just don't have the time. I'm almost 40. I don't have time for other people's feelings, and I need to take care of me, period. So that's what I worry about.
That's always the answer, by the way. Exactly like that.
Hey.
I mean, worded a little bit differently, but that's it every time. I just don't have time for it. That's their stuff.
Yeah, the drama. I mean, yeah. I don't know. I mean,
it's fine on TikTok. It's fine on TV, but not in my personal space. No.
Oh my God. Yeah. Sometimes I want to say, we're not on a reality TV show here.
Sometimes I feel like I am.
Like, did I stumble onto the set and nobody told me?
Like, guys, if I was on Real Housewives of Cape Cod, would you tell me?
He's been keeping a secret.
I knew it.
See, I've been trying to hide it with the subtitle, but apparently you saw right through it. Totally.
Discoveries that are made here.
But it's true that, I mean, you have this nailed, Alex. You've had this nailed for quite some time. And
yeah.
As so often happens, when somebody really nails it, they have trouble explaining why they can nail it.
Yeah.
Because it was easy for you.
It's just so many years of the bull. So it's like, I got tired of it. And I was like, no more.
You kind of reached a limit, right?
No mas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of like what, this ex-friend of mine.
Yeah.
I put up with it. I wasn't going to put up with it anymore. Literally, I had to maintain some contact with him because we still had a business relationship that hadn't been played out. I insisted the only way he could ever be allowed to contact me was by email.
Yeah.
And it was not hard to set that boundary.
Good for you.
That was actually an easy boundary to set at that point. So that's how I can identify with what you talk about. How it was just like, I wasn't going to put up with it anymore.
And then some people slip through and then you're like, whoa. I can set a boundary. I don't have to be bothered by you. Like, you're doing too much and you're getting my feathers ruffled. Like, stop.
Yeah. I think part of the issue is sometimes people, to use your words there, like, they slip through and then it's easy for their, like, encroachments, right? And then suddenly it's like a big violation and you're like, well, how in the world, like, what happened?
Right. And then you trace it back and it's like, oh, they were actually 3 or 4 violations.
Yep. But I missed it. I missed it somehow.
Or I let it slide.
Yeah, that's my experience. It's usually let it slide. I knew it was there, but it's not that big of a deal. Well,
yeah.
Actually it was.
Until it was.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So once you recognize that, maybe that's what makes it easy. You finally say, okay, this is a bigger deal than I thought it was.
Yeah, exactly. And then you just cut it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, like I used to be, okay, I hate to admit this, but like in my 20s, even late 20s, I was a bit of a doormat, you know, and I really let people get by with a lot.
Mm.
And one of and ironically, this is one of the most powerful things that I ever had to do is, my mom, I loved her very dearly. She passed away in 2008. And, but she had we believe some kind of psychological issue where sometimes she could be pretty, mean spirited. Like she could say some really nasty things. She could be physically violent. And I remember I was in my early 30s and she would call and leave me these messages on my answering machine. And if friends were over or whatever, they'd be like, oh my God, that's vile. Or she'd send me emails at work and my coworkers would see them and they're like, my God, this is hurtful. It's hateful. And finally I had to have a conversation with Mom. And I said, hey, I love you very much. I want to have a healthy relationship with you and this can't continue.
Good for you.
And I'll tell you what, Alex, after that, it's like, if I don't allow my mom to mistreat me,
Period.
like, no,
Exactly.
because if anybody's going to get to mistreat me, she had, you know, it probably would have been her.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? But it's like, no more.
It was the same for me, but with my father.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Exactly. If I'm not going to let my father talk to me that way, you're sure not going to.
And it's like, you don't have a chance.
Not today or tomorrow.
Yeah. So we can relate there.
Right. Yeah.
But going back to something you mentioned a few moments ago, you also talked about how we can be pretty rough on ourselves, kind of in the same way that your mom was rough on you. And our favorite way of describing it around here is that if we treated our best friend the way we treated ourselves, we wouldn't have a best friend. Because nobody would put up with that, right? I mean, who's going to put up with the way, but we can really be really cruel to ourselves, not even realizing that we're doing it, but we are.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's horrific how we can treat ourselves. I had, because of some of the stuff with Mom, I actually went to therapy for quite a few years and she became, you know, she was my therapist / coach. And I loved talking with her. Like she helped me so much. And one of the things that she said to me in one of our sessions was, like, would you ever talk to a friend the way you talk to yourself?
Right.
And I said, well, of course not. And she's like, then why are you talking to yourself that way?
Exactly. Yeah. You just pin yourself on the wall there.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, that's a good point. But we do it. I mean, think about how many bad things we tell ourselves about ourselves.
It's also something that can be a challenge to shift because if you've been doing it long enough, it's very habitual. You mentioned neural pathways. Boy, that one can be just buried in there, just, you know, attached with, you know, staples and nails and everything else.
Super glue.
Super glue. Yeah.
You know, and it's one of those things that you can create new neural pathways, right? But it's like, you have to become aware of how you're talking to yourself. And then you have to you have to literally stop yourself and say, no, that's the judge or that's, you know, whatever. And that can be hard, but with that self-awareness is key, right? Nothing happens without self-awareness, but that's where it begins.
When you're coaching somebody who has something that is that thoroughly ingrained in their nervous system and they're struggling to overcome it, they're doing their best. They're trying to notice it each time, but it's just haunting them. What else can you do to help them? Can you give us some tools, give us some tricks?
Okay. So first of all, in a coaching session, that's one of the things I'm listening for. Because if you're listening to someone and they're talking, like, let's say they have a presentation and they don't do well. You know, where do they go with that? Is it like, oh my goodness, you know, I didn't do as well as I could have in that presentation. Next time I should prepare more. That's healthy. If it's, you know what, I'm such a loser because I didn't do well. I'm never good at this. We got to stop that, right? We have to, and by bringing that to the surface, they start to hear it more often. And I think that's part of it. It's building that self-awareness. I mean, that is key. The other thing there's actually an app. And it's the PQ app and it's, you know, it's not free, but it's a great 6-week program that you go through. And it's every week you learn more about how your saboteurs are showing up. And it's kind of a combination of that and these like 2 to 3 minute mini meditation sessions where, you know, and then they have you like visualize a past hijacking, they call it, when let's say your judge went out of control and jumped all over you. And so you start to visualize it, and that heightens your awareness. And the other piece of that is then to think about, okay, so in the future, when that happens again, how am I going to stop it? And what am I going to do differently? How am I going to make that shift? Because that's how we start to kind of reprogram that thought process. And it's a fabulous program. When I went through it, like I said, hypervigilance was one of mine. Not surprising with my childhood and everything. I was probably, but I always said about like, if worry were an Olympic event, I'm the gold medalist, hands down. I'm Usain Bolt. Everybody else is playing for second. And I'd wake up at like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'd be worrying about all this stuff. And it's exhausting. And I started going through the program in like within 2 to 3 weeks that it stopped.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a good result.
Yeah, that's a really good result. And we've had a lot of clients who've had great results with it. So, I meant to mention this earlier too. If people are curious about the saboteurs and which ones they might have, I have a place on my website that has a free assessment. So nice. I can give that to you later if you want.
Yeah. We'll make sure there's a link to that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Stuff. You know, when you said what you were saying about the app, the way you said it, that a number of people can be helped with it, it reminded me of something. Not everybody gets helped by the same tools, no matter what the tools are. It doesn't matter what they are. And in this case, I'm thinking, well, the options that we're presenting so far are, on the one hand, there's the app, and the other hand, there's dealing with a coach. So that raises a question. Other than the app didn't work, when do you decide it's time to work with a coach?
That's a good question. It's very individual, right? I think when you have tried a number of things and you're just not making progress, that might be a good time to think, is it worth reaching out to somebody else? I think, and this is a harder one, but when our self-awareness isn't there, that's when a coach can really, because a coach can hold up a mirror for you and help you see what's been invisible so far. Now, what's hard about that is if you don't have the self-awareness to kind of see that, then you might not have the self-awareness to know that, hey, I might want to change something. So I'd say if you've tried a number of things and it's not working and you want to make the change, it's worth at least talking to different coaches. And the other thing I'd say on that is be choosy. Like, talk to people, see who's a good fit. Because not every coach is a good fit for every person. You know?
And so in fact, that's something a lot of people don't realize. I know about it just because I've had so many coaches here on the program, but almost all coaches will give you a free first session just so you can evaluate, just so you can find it. And they can evaluate whether they're good for you.
That's right. I mean, I can't think of any, I think that's a good practice for coaches to have, because sometimes like I'll meet with someone and I'm thinking, man, I really want to help you. And I know I'm not the best fit. So in that case, what my practice is always to say, hey, because I know a lot of coaches, right? I can say, hey, here are 3 other people that I think will be a better fit for you. And I'm happy to introduce you to them.
Which is exactly what a good coach does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's what we should be wanting, is to help. It's not about getting another client. I mean, that's not what this is about. This is about helping people.
And when you get that kind of a recommendation from a coach, that's when you know, first of all, that was a good coach. And second of all, it's a good recommendation.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
that's why I go out of my ways to know people in the field, right?
Yeah, sure.
You know, because here's the other thing. If I'm a good fit for everybody, I'm a fit for nobody.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, really and truly. And so I know that.
You're making me think. I often make reference to past co-hosts and present co-hosts because of the various things I've learned from so many people, including from Alex. But the 2 who I refer to the most are one of my earliest co-hosts. His name's Joel Elston. By the way, Alex, he was on the show yesterday. I got a chance to have a show with Joel. Yeah, which is pretty cool. And the other is Cindy Chavez, and both of them were with me for a number of years. And in this case, I'm thinking about situations with both of them. So I'm going to tell you about both of them. With Cindy, Cindy once told me, she's told me many great things over the years, but one thing that she told me one time, on the topic of being a people pleaser, was how I don't remember how she told the story, but a good friend basically played the role of coach, like you were describing, and pointed out to her what she was doing, that she was people pleasing, and the way she was doing it was she was being unwilling to accept and receive a gift, whether it be, like the example she gave was you're out to lunch with somebody and the other person says, I got the check. And you say, oh, no, I got the check, because you can't allow the other person to give you the gift of buying the lunch for you. Right? Classic. Yeah. And when she told me that story, first of all, I love the story.
Yeah.
But the second thing that occurred to me was, I wonder how many people do that without realizing it.
Right?
Because I think it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, among other things, it points to lack of self-esteem, lack of self-love, insufficient, not lack, but insufficient self-esteem, self-love, self-confidence, self-caring. You're willing to care for everybody else, but you're not willing to care for yourself. It's kind of the same concept we were talking about before. It's a little bit of a different twist on it. But instead of beating yourself up much more than you beat anybody else up, it's refusing to take care of yourself, which pretty much amounts to the same thing. It's just a different way of saying it.
And what you're talking about there, that's very much the pleaser, saboteur. And where that comes from is in childhood, where did we learn how to get love? By pleasing others, by taking care of others, by giving. And it comes from if I don't do that, will people love me back?
Yeah.
That's one of the origins of it. So I can complete, it's a fabulous story.
Yeah. And it reinforces for me, well, first of all, because I love both Joel and Cindy, it reinforces for me how it doesn't matter how advanced you are. It doesn't matter how much you've learned. It doesn't matter, what great things you've accomplished in your life. Everybody has these things that they have to at some point deal with, these inner saboteurs, as you call them. And we go through processes, we go through coaching, we go through therapy, we take courses, we download apps, and we're able to work through a whole bunch of them, but they still keep popping up in different ways, and they're different ones. One pops up and we clear that one and something else comes along. It's almost, it's like an endless journey almost.
It is an endless journey. But here's the thing. Think about how far we've come since the beginning of the journey.
Yeah. That's celebrating the victory, the accomplishments along the way.
Yeah.
Which is important.
We often miss that though.
We do.
We're so quick to beat ourselves up. I had a coach describe it to me this one way, where if this is your baseline right here, when in learning and adult learning and development, we go up and then we kind of come down. We go back up, kind of come down. And when we notice are in those valleys when we come back down, and that's when we beat ourselves up. So the whole thing is you have to help people see, you went up, you came down, blah, 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 but look at how far above the baseline you are. And sometimes that's what we need to help people see is like their progress, because progress is motivating.
And then when you were talking about, how you refer to other coaches and so forth, Cindy has told me the same thing on multiple occasions. Joel has done the same thing, but Joel also was reminding me, just yesterday of his background. He has a really unique background, very painful background actually, because when he was very young, he developed a gambling addiction. And he ended up stealing from his family's insurance company that they owned. He ended up going out to Vegas, gambling all the money away. Didn't have any money to go home again. Didn't have any money to live anywhere. He had to live on the streets. He literally starts his book out talking about how he had to eat out of a McDonald's dumpster in order to survive. I mean, just horrible stuff that he went through. But that became a foundation for later on when, also he got arrested and went to jail too. He had to go through that. But after he passed through all that, he has a great story that I won't tell about how going into jail was actually the best thing that happened, and his whole vibration changed at that point. But, later on, he learned about law of attraction. He learned about, the different ways that you can take control of your own life. And he ended up developing a practice first as a therapist and then later on as a life coach, initially with the desire of helping other gambling addicts, which, by the way, are the hardest addicts to help because they don't have any money to pay for the fees. So it's a real challenge to try to work through that. Well, he had all kinds of interesting stories to tell about that. He talked about how he actually helped to found 2 different clinics that fed that. But in both of those situations, he was working in a clinic that basically got funded by somebody else, and he got kicked out of his own clinic. And what was really interesting is that in both cases, especially in the second one, it happened even faster in the second one. In the first one, he got kicked out of the clinic, and because of all those relationships he had, because you talked about how you had these relationships with these other coaches, within, I think it was a 2 to 3 week period, his entire calendar got filled up, and all of a sudden he found himself in private practice. And then he went and founded the second one, and after the second one he got kicked out of, he got kicked out on a Friday, and his calendar was filled by Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
And it was all because of those connections that he developed with all these other coaches and therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists and all that. You know, they all heard about what happened. Oh yeah, we'll refer these to Joel.
That's right. Man, the connections are so important for so many reasons in our lives.
Yes.
In fact, I'll tell you something I like to tell a lot of guests, because this is an unknown study. It's unknown because I've only seen it listed in one place. It was performed by Sean Aker, if you know who he is.
Oh, yeah.
Spokesman of the positive psychology movement.
Love
and the only place you'll find him talking about this is when he published his first book, The Happiness Advantage. He was on a tour promoting the book, and he ended up on NPR. And there's a recording of his appearance on NPR that I got on a DVD. And after he does the entire book, this doesn't show up in the book at all. After he talks about the entire book and finishes his presentation, he does like a little after presentation, and he tells about this study that he did. It's the only time I've ever seen or heard anything about this study. It's the most amazing study I've ever heard of, and it's not publicized, and he hasn't publicized it, and I want to ask him why, but that's another question. But the study was this. He was at Harvard. He was trying to figure out how to help the Harvard students who were feeling so much pressure and were sabotaging themselves and so forth. He wanted to find some way to show them, here's how you can get the success you're looking for, whatever that success is. So he did the study to try to identify, okay, what are the causes of success? And it was like a 100 questions survey, and like 1/5 of the entire institution took the survey. I mean, it was one of those kinds of studies. And there was only one question that he found a correlation on. And it was the last one that he threw on as an afterthought. He wasn't even thinking it was going to be one of the major factors, but it was. Well, the question was about social connectivity. And the correlation, you're going to love this, the correlation that he found between just that one factor and success was 0.7, 70% predictive all by itself.
Man, that's incredible.
I mean, you can see why I'm just blown away that survey isn't out there all over the place. You have to go to that one little obscure source in order to find them. Think, what? Everybody should know about this. This is important.
Should know about that.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it too, like connections. It's great for our success that way, but also like in terms of our happiness, our longevity, you know, the social connections. I saw something on LinkedIn today, and it's something I've seen in other places, like, I don't know, the Journal of Positive Psychology, about as we age, social connections is one of the things that's one of the most powerful things for our brain health. It keeps us healthier by being connected. And think about what's happened in COVID and with social media. I think it's easier to be less connected, you know, because like, oh, I went on and I liked somebody's post, but that's not the same as like picking up the phone or having lunch with somebody. I mean, it's okay, but it's not the same, you know? Yeah. Wow. I'm with you though, Walt. That study should be out there.
It should be out there. That's like, that's huge. That's huge. And what you just said reminds me of something. What was it? It was, oh, I know. It came from a movie. In the movie, one character is talking to another, and the character he's talking to is a young girl in her teenage years. And he says to her, would you rather have 100 Instagram friends or 5 real friends? And what a great question.
Yeah. How'd she answer?
She answered 5 real friends.
Oh, good.
Okay, good girl.
Wow.
But I mean, how often do people think about that? You know?
No. It's so easy to judge ourselves based on social media.
Yeah, it really is. But it's also an opportunity. And this is where I find such joy in it, because it's hard to make that connection, but now the connection's right in front of everybody. They can't avoid it anymore. And so eventually it bites them. Eventually, in some way, it shows up, and they have to say to themselves, well, which way am I going on this one? Yeah. They have to make the decision. And usually in the midst of some, really miserable situation, but because that's the way we tend to bring up these dramatic situations, but
Right.
Still have to face it at some point. And that to me is great because that's where their growth is happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Great question.
Hey, we're running out of time. I want to make sure we get some information from you. First of all, you told us about the, what is it? A survey? What's the thing?
It's called the Saboteur Assessment.
The assessment. Okay. Saboteur
So
assessment.
to find that, it's just on my website, which is bobbykahler.com and then / resources. And on that resource page, there's a couple assessments. One is a saboteur assessment, which will tell you which one you have or which ones. The other one will tell you your overall positive intelligence or PQ score. So in other words, how often is your brain working for you or against you?
Interesting.
Both those they're both free. They take, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes. They're not very long at all. Great assessments though.
Okay. I'll try to find them and make sure that we got links directly to each one of them to make it easy for people. We'll put it into the show notes.
If you have any trouble, let me know. I can send them to you.
Okay. I appreciate that. And then if somebody wants to reach out to you personally, how do they find you?
The website's a great place. Also, I'm super active on LinkedIn. I post there quite a bit. And again, it's just Bobbi Kahler. And you can either message me there or there's a way to email me or contact me through the website. So either one of those work.
Okay. That's good. So we'll make sure we'll include, that link too so that they can find you because there may be somebody listening who says, you know what, I need to talk to somebody. She might be the one to talk to. So, that's the way these kinds of relationships get formed.
Yeah. And you know what? I try to put a lot of content out there so that people can there's a lot of free stuff so that, because I don't think it should always be like I said, I've coached a lot of people in my life. I've been lucky enough to work with some of the major brands on the planet. I want to bring some of this stuff to everyone. So so there's a lot of free content where you can consume that and then hopefully that's going to help a lot too.
Well, once again, you're giving me a wonderful segue because I always like to wind up each program by doing one particular thing with the guest because all the guests who come on, like yourself, are givers, people who are trying to find some way to give to the population at large. And the way I like to do it is to recognize something that doesn't get recognized. So there are many people, thousands probably, who have heard you on a podcast or they read something that you wrote on your website or they picked up some sort of content that you created and they listened to it or read it or whatever and got something and it helped them in some way that you'll never find because you'll never meet them. You'll never see them, but you helped them. So on behalf of all the people you've never met and you never will meet and you never have seen and you never will see who you helped without knowing about it, thank you on their behalf. And thank you for what you're continuing to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's nice encouragement.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important because we skip over that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's almost immeasurably important. So that's why I make it a practice. We got to make sure everybody who's a giver hears that message.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. And Alex, I'm going to go to you for I often do this. I'm going to go to you for our final word. I want you to kind of tie everything up in a bow here in terms of what we've been talking about, which is always hard to do. But if you found one way to express this is the takeaway message for today, what would you say that takeaway message is?
The whole title, Overcoming Your Inner Saboteurs.
She's always very concise, right to the point.
Why waste words if you don't need to, right?
It works for her. What can I say? Oh, this is good. No, seriously, Bobbi, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining us, taking the time, sharing your beautiful ability to express yourself clearly. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's evident that you've done the work. No doubt in my mind at all. But
thank
so
you.
Congratulations on that. But thank you for what you're doing too. It's really good stuff.
And likewise, I love what you're doing as well too. So thank you. And thanks for having me as a guest. This was great.
Oh, we love it. This is so much fun. So thank you much. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. And we will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.